Hello, today we will be talking about the Greeks to the rise of Christianity. To start off, I'm going to introduce you to the god of theater. His name is Dionysus. He's the god of sex, wine, music, dance, and theater. And then I'm going to share with you a little family tree of the gods and the Greek mythology. The Greeks have a lot of different gods and goddesses, and they each represent different things. You guys will be writing your paper, so hopefully you'll have some time to adventure and figure out which ones you like for yourself. But Dionysus is Zeus. Okay, so Zeus used to get around a lot, and so Zeus is the father of Dionysus. And if you know a little bit about Greek culture, if you saw Hercules, the Disney version, which is honestly actually a pretty good version, we would watch it in class. It would be like a fun popcorn day because they actually break down Greek mythology in a really fun way and it's easily digestible. But anyway, so Dionysus is the son of Zeus, who is the king of the gods, and a human woman named Semele. The reason I'm bringing up so much about Greek mythology or the gods and goddesses because a lot of the Greek plays are revolve around gods and goddesses, or they write a play and then they don't. I guess you kind of like write yourself into a corner and you don't know how to fix it, and so like the gods intervene. But the gods and mythology are a big part of Greek drama, tragedies, and comedies. And then, as I mentioned in the last chapter when we were kind of talking about Eastern theater, a lot of it is rooted into rituals, and so that's how Greek theater also came about, well, is speculated to have come about. So Dionysus he was a god, and he became more popular. So when you had a popular god, you would have festivals to celebrate the gods. So in Athens, they would have three festivals to celebrate Dionysus. So in December to January, somewhere around there, you'd have something called Rural Dionysia, which you did phallic chants. We'll get into this. The Greeks loved penis jokes, so you'd have sacrifices and you'd drink wine. And then you would have the Linnea Festival, where you'd host comedy plays. And then you'd have the Anthestria, which is an early wine festival. Comedies were added around 326 BCE. And then you would have the really big one, which is called City Dionysia. Quick story time. So there are legends about gods, but then there's also legends of like how kind of theater started. So it started from these festivals. They used to be in the early stages of City Dionysia. It would be people having dithyrambic competitions, or just like a dithyramb is when you have like a chorus and you're singing, so they're singing their hymns or their praises or whatever they were singing. And then it was rumored that one day the hymns it would probably be like stories about the gods because they're paying homage to gods at these festivals. So rumor has it that there was one guy who just stepped out of the chorus, and his name was Thespius. And he decided to, instead of just sing about what they were talking about or what the myth, whatever they were doing, he started actually acting it out. And then Thespian is sometimes what you call somebody who does theater. And so that is kind of like a myth about how actual performance started on stage for the Greeks. So City Dionysia was a big deal. You didn't only go just to go to a festival and have fun. The plays at the time, they would talk a lot about things that were going on, like current political events. Greece was a democracy, and so you had freedom of speech. You could talk about current politicians and things like that. You didn't have like an emperor who would get mad at you, which like later when the Romans come in, you could not do that anymore. But so it was a lot of free speech, and people kind of saw it as their civic duty to go to the theater, to have to bring the community together, have a good time, and like maybe learn about your community and what problems you might face. And anyway, so City Dionysia would begin at like 6 a.m. or at dawn. The theaters were always on really like mountains, in mountainsides, and the reason why theaters were always in mountainsides and they carved it in there is they didn't have microphones. They used masks to help with microphone to make the voices be heard, because There'd be like 14,000 people. But they also, on the hillside, you have echoes, so you can help like hear people better too on stage. But they were always up high. So you would start dawn and you would wake up and you would start marching to the mountaintop theater. And everybody would like dance and sing and have a good time, probably drink wine. There's always wine involved. And so yeah, they started really early. So it was an all-day festival. And some things that they included, of course, were rituals and ceremonies. Oh, the ceremonial procession. Okay, I'm going to do that again. So some things that this included were rituals, ceremonies. Then there's the ceremonial procession of Dionysius to Athens, which is what I was just talking about in the morning. You'd have the dithyrambic competitions, which is chorus of people singing and dancing. You'd have satyr plays, which are like, they take regular plays, like tragedies, but then they make it comic. So it's like basically spoof plays. So any of those like date movies or like the scary movie like 1 through 7, those are like satirical movies on horror movies. So they had a version of that. And then you'd have play tragedy competitions, which started beginning in 534 BCE. So City Dionysia, as I was saying, is kind of like civic theater. It had both a social and religious elements. They required attendance for all free males, but since they could fit 14,000 people in their theater, it was assumed that women might be there and also the slaves. So everybody was there. Women could not vote on, they had play competitions and they couldn't vote on it. But they were funded by the Chorgai, which were wealthy Athenian and politicians, and they were eligible for prizes if they picked a playwright and their play won. Most performers were community members. They had military dancers. And then it was meant to educate the populace, and theater was thought to be medicine. So I'll get into this a little bit. So there's Aristotle, and in the how to read a play section that I made for you guys, you saw that there was something called Aristotle's Poetics. Aristotle, who, if you know who Plato is, Plato was a philosopher. He was a student of Plato, so this is like one philosophical dude going to the next philosophical dude. And actually, Aristotle taught Alexander the Great, and we'll get into that later. So when I say it's a form of medicine, Aristotle believed that when you did theater or you saw theater, it was cathartic. And catharsis is like, you get your emotions out. And he felt like the theater was a place for you to like cry or see a tragedy and like get all that like shit out of your system, so then you can go out and then be like a productive person of society. So like come to the theater, get your feels, and then leave as a productive member of society and go do good. So he kind of felt that. So what did a Greek theater look like? I mentioned they're always up on top of the hill, but here's what a breakdown of this looks like. So you have the orchestra, which is where the chorus is. Then you have something called a skene, which is the stage. And then eventually it had like rooms for costume changings because people had different masks, so that's where you get your masks. The parados are where the audience enters and exits, and the theatron are where the audience sits. And then I'm going to include a fun little Crash Course Theater thought bubble because he has a really fun animations here, and he'll jump into it a little bit more for you. In the Crash Course Theater, he kind of talked a little bit about seats, but eventually they had stone seats and they had limestone seats that were in the front row. And in these seats, they would be reserved for prominent members of the community. And so like that would be their reserved seat to the theater. And it had a back. It's made out of limestone. It's much more comfortable. And it would have their names etched into it. But major tragic playwrights of this time, and all of these guys, I said that there were dramatic competitions as a part of the festival. So they would have like 3 to 4 playwrights submit plays, and the community would then watch them over the next like day or two or however long the festival lasted, and they would vote on who was the best. They would actually select like 10 random people from the audience to then like name a winner, and the winners would get like a feast and like a little bit of prizes, and it would be a good time. So some of our major tragic playwrights were Aeschylus, who's kind of known as the father of tragedy. He did something huge where he added a second actor. So, as I mentioned before, there was no theater at all, and so it was just like people singing in a chorus, and then one guy decided to break off. And that one guy, for a while, it was just the chorus and one person switching masks, being different characters. But then Aeschylus was like, hey, why don't we add a second guy on stage? Because again, there are no women actors at this point in life. So he's like, why don't we add a second guy so then it would be more interesting? And so then two guys would like switch masks. And he wrote about 70 to 90 plays, but we only have 7 that have survived. And then one of the biggest things that he wrote is the Oresteia. The Oresteia is the only complete like trilogy we have. Oh, sorry, noise. The only complete trilogy series we have from this time period. Others might have been written, but because people used to like to take over cities and burn libraries and museums and churches and everything, we don't have a ton of stuff that has been saved through the years. So if it was popular, it got written down a lot more, and that's how we find ancient texts. But anyway, so the Oresteia is about a prominent family in Greece, and like there's a lot of like murder back and forth. Greek tragedies are super interesting. So if for your final project you want to, there are a couple Greek tragedies in there. That might be a good thing to read. They are juicy. They're like soap operas. But anyway, the story ends up talking about how democracy started. Like, it's a myth about how democracy started in Greece. Yeah, bad cut. So Athena is the goddess of war, but it's more like kind of like fairness. She kind of decides like what is just. So she's kind of like the goddess of justice. And so it's how she came down, and she like had a trial for this family because like people were murdering each other, and decided like what was just for the just punishment, and that's how democracy started. So he wrote a play where it's 3 parts, and that's what it comes down to. That's the myth it's based on. I'm just gonna say that Greeks and just Greek mythology, this is probably my favorite section of theater. I have 2 dogs. Their names are Athena and Persephone. Persephone is the queen of the underworld. She marries Hades, but kind of against her will. But anyway, cool story if you ever want to check it out. So then we have Sophocles, who was from 497 to 406 BCE. He wrote 123 plays, but only 7 of them have survived. And he added a 3rd actor, because why not? Why not have more than 2 people on stage? And he won. He was probably the biggest winner of this competition. He won 24 out of 30 of the playwriting competitions that he entered. And then he wrote probably one of the most famous Greek plays, and maybe you guys read it in high school or at some point in college, Oedipus the King, also known as Oedipus Rex. This story is about a prophecy. There's a king and a queen, and there's a prophecy the king gets that his son was one day gonna like kill him. So he's like, I need to kill my baby. But the mother feels she doesn't want to kill her baby. So she hands off the baby to one of the nurses, and she hands it off to somebody else. And so this baby, like, everybody thinks it's dead, or he's dead, but then he's not dead. And he comes back years later, and he doesn't know he's related. He has no idea what his identity is. But he does end up overthrowing the king, and he marries his mother and has, like, sister children with her. And then he finds out that that's his mother, and, like, after he does, a whole bunch of stuff happens, and he gouges out his eyes. So, tragedy right there for you. And Aristotle kind of based a lot of the poetics on, like, Sophocles kind of playwriting. He liked his type of playwriting. That was just a fun fact for you. And then we have, last but not least, Euripides. He lived from 480 to 406 BCE. He had 92 to 95 plays, and 18 of those have survived. And he was a theatrical innovator. He focused on characters' inner lives. So what that means is a lot of times Greek tragedies, they are more interested in the action. Like I was saying, like people get murdered constantly. There's a lot of intrigue, betrayal, and all of that kind of stuff that goes into it, and a lot of cursing. But the characters kind of fall flat. But he was like, you know what? Maybe we should think about the character. Maybe that will kind of make the story better. So that is something that he brought into his plays. And the most famous play that he wrote is Medea, which is a good one. It's about revenge. Her husband leaves her, and Medea is like, you can't leave me for this like or this other princess, and he's like, well, I already did. And she's like, well, fuck you, I'm gonna kill our children because you love them, and I'm like a badass bitch, and like, you can go fuck yourself. Like, some, and like, this is in a time when like you don't have women as central characters, but yeah, he wrote one, so that's pretty cool. And then he wrote the Bacchae, which is a play about Dionysus, actually. And Dionysus is the main character, so plays about gods. It's about how, so his mother, okay, sorry, lots of thoughts again. So his mom was a human. Her name is Semele, and Zeus was his father. So Zeus is a very promiscuous guy. He has a ton of children. If you look at the Greek family tree that I gave you, he's all around. So he cheats on Hera always. And Hera this time was like pissed. She was like, really? You're cheating on me with a human? Like, that's not cool. And like, Zeus would come to this human girl, Semele, in disguise. And she was also like highborn. So these are all like, Greek stories are very rarely ever about like middle class or low class people. They're always usually about royals. So, Hera comes in disguise to her, and she knows she's like doing it with Zeus, but like it's not his true form, but she just takes his word for it. And Hera comes down and she's like, hey sweetie, are you sure this guy is really Zeus? Any guy can just say he's Zeus. If he's really Zeus and loves you, he would show you his true form. And she totally knows that that will like kill her, because like a human can't, or a mortal can't look on a god's true form. So Hera doesn't care. So next time Zeus comes, she's like, hey, if you love me, you'd show me your true form. I don't believe you. Just like, please show me. So she does. Or he does. Zeus does. And then all of a sudden, she then gets blinded and then becomes a like pile of dust. But he saves his baby's life, Dionysus, and Zeus opens up his thigh and puts the baby in there and incubates the baby and then like births it through like his inner thigh. Yeah, the Greeks can be gross sometimes. And then, so this story, the Bacchae, is about how Dionysus, the city is supposed to be, like, he's supposed to be the main god of that city, but they don't believe in him. And so Semele's whole family, like, they shun the fact that she did that, and they totally just thought she, like, ran off with some guy, and none of that happened, and that it's all fake. And they're all talking crap about her. So they're kind of, like, staining the reputation of his mother, and so Dionysus is pissed off, and he comes back and he seeks revenge on his like cousins and family, and he like makes everybody go insane. And yeah, it's just a revenge play.